As so often, the problem is biographical sources. Uh, Mostly what we know about Jane Austen, the author, comes from her letters. But the problem about letters, I mean, people don't write letters much anymore. That's so sad. But you mail them, and so they're gone. They're off, and somebody with somebody else. And unless you happen to make a copy of your letters, which very few people do, or that person saved all the letters, then you're really limited. And so we are really limited, and we know about Jane Austen because of her letters that were thrown away, lost over the years, just fell apart, whatever it might be. So we don't know a whole lot about her. In fact, we don't know a lot about Emily Dickinson either, but we know at least a little bit about both. Jane Austen grew up in a family. Her father was a pastor in the Anglican Church. And in the Anglican Church, if you read 19th century stories, there seem to be about 20 different levels of priests and clerics. But he was a pastor. She came from a family of a lot of kids. She grew up in a nice house in the country. And so she puts a lot of this into her books. Pride and Prejudice, a great example. Large family, house in the country. And so she very much writes from her own life, which is what I think most good writers do. She was largely self-taught. Again, as so many people were, especially women in those days. There weren't a lot of opportunities for going to school at any level. And so she read voraciously from her father's library, borrowed everything, read everything, like Alexander Hamilton. Every book on the shelf she could get to, she read. So she was very well educated, like Mary Shelley in that sense. And so she was interested in really just about everything. But she read novels, and she makes fun of them. I guess maybe that's a little bit strong. She satirizes them in her own works, because the novels that she grew up with were the ones where the young woman falls in love with man, they go happily ever after, like a Disney movie. And she said, I want to write something a little bit different than that. She never got married, but she did have a serious boyfriend court her when she was a young woman in her 20s, about your age, and he was, from all what we can know about him, he was a pretty nice guy. He went on to be a judge, a lawyer, and did well with himself. But she writes about him later and says, he was the one, really. If there were anyone, it was him. But she said no to marriage. She just didn't want to do it. She didn't want to be tied down. She didn't want those sort of restrictions in her life. She wanted to write. She didn't want to take care of a household and children and all of that. She wanted to write. And so she said no, and so she never got married. But she did write. She didn't write as much as Dickens, but what she wrote was just some amazing books. And we read a little bit of Pride and Prejudice for this class today, but there are plenty of others, and they all have certain aspects in common with each other, but they all are different as well, and they all, I think, would make pretty good movies. She published in her lifetime, but as was very common in those days for a woman, she published anonymously by a lady. Because if you published under your own name, then you were considered, was considered a most improper thing to do for any proper young woman to publish in her own name. So the best you could do would be publish anonymously, or you could use a man's name. Some of them, the women did that as well, but she just said by a lady, and so she wasn't at all well known in her lifetime. She wasn't like Dickens. But she did publish some in her life, and then some of her works came out later. I just tried to think of, what are some aspects of her writing, really. Humor. She's got a great sense of humor. It's just a wry sense of humor, if you will, where it's dry and just wonderfully satirical. as she looks at men and women in her different stories. She loves irony, absolutely loves that. She loves realism in the sense that, in her stories, well, like in any relationship, I mean, we've all been in, hopefully in some sort of a relationship, during your life. And it's not all easy by any means. Sometimes it's just hard, whether it be boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever it might be. It can be really difficult sometimes, and she writes about that. It's not all happiness, as in the romantic novels of her day. And also social commentary. She was very much interested, like Dickens was, in social commentary, about writing about what was wrong with the world she lived in. And she doesn't mind telling, she does it in a subtle way, and in a fictional way, but sometimes that's the very best way to do it. So she's got a lot of these qualities. And here's her gravestone. The nice thing about everybody we're talking about, I think everybody we're talking about in this semester, is that you can go see their graves if you want to, which is hard. In Hymn 111, if you're talking about Gilgamesh or Cicero even, you can't find their graves, but you can find the graves of all of these authors. And so, in memory of Jane Austen, and look how she is represented here. Youngest daughter of the late Reverend George Austen, who gets his name in just as big letters as hers, because that's who you are. If you're a woman in the early 1800s, normally you would be identified with your husband. She wasn't married, so she's identified by her father. And then it talks about, that's just actually a nice little blurb there. But so she dies fairly young. She's in her 40s, I believe, when she dies, having just been very modestly successful as a writer, not very well known at all. It's going to be after her death where she really takes off, as so many writers. One of the things she writes about that she socializes is the caste system in Britain at the time. There's still remnants of this around, where you have different social castes, social classes, if you will, where you have, obviously the monarchy and, the dukes and such are at the very top, and then you have the lords and the ladies, and then you have the professionals, and then you have the working class. And it was very difficult to move between different classes. And it was very much frowned on, and took a long time and a lot of effort for that to happen. And people, even in the upper classes who say had lost all their money and were just living, hand to mouth, they would always think of themselves as better than some millionaire who made his way up the ladder. So his social classes were very. I don't know, it was hard to break out of them, and it was not good for the society, because you couldn't have movement, you couldn't have growth. And so she talked about this a lot, and she satirizes the different social classes, as you see in Pride and Prejudice, where you have people of different classes who are dating each other, marrying each other, and the uproar that causes. She talks about marriage. I put this up here just because I thought this was a great 19th century photo of a bride who doesn't look very happy on her wedding day at all. Everybody else is happy, but she's not, because, as we've seen so much, remember in the humanities sequence, back from Hymn 111, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, the life of a woman was very much defined by her husband, by marriage. Well, you didn't have much of an option. Jane Austen was unusual. Emily Dickinson was unusual. They didn't get married. That really was not something that many people could afford to do. But they had a little bit of money, so they could, and they were also very strong-willed. But marriage was something that you were expected to get married. You were expected to take care of your husband. And divorce was, oh my goodness, divorce was really almost unthinkable, because one reason, and this is still, it's true in America, it's true even today, I think, in America and around the world. One thing that keeps women in marriages, which, you guys know this, one thing that keeps women in marriages that are bad, where you have a husband mistreating a wife, is that she doesn't necessarily have any other options, economic options, especially if she has children. I mean, what's she going to do? Walk away and leave? Well, she would starve, and so would her children if the husband didn't take them, which he probably wouldn't. So you could be trapped in the truest sense in a bad marriage. And Jane Austen wrote about this. And unless, that's one nice thing about all of the women here in the classroom. You all have skills, you all are going to have options for employment. I wish you all the very best in your relationships, but if something doesn't work out, you can walk away and go do something else. And you couldn't back then. That would be a very sad and unfortunate thing, but imagine being in a situation where you couldn't. I think back actually my great-grandmother, who was unusual back in the early 1900s. She was very unusual because she was trained as a nurse. And that was one of your two options if you were a woman in America in the early 1900s. You could be trained as a nurse or as a school teacher. And you couldn't be married. If you were a nurse and you got married, you had to quit. If you were a school teacher, got married, you had to quit. But what happened is she was married to a guy, my great-grandfather, who just checked all the boxes of being a really rotten husband. But she did something unusual, and that's walk away. And she was able to do it because she could earn a living as a nurse. And she suffered all the social stigma of it, which was pretty high back then. But she was an admirable woman who said, "I'm not going to put up with this abuse. I'm not going to have my kids put up with it." And so she walked away. But it was a very hard thing to do in her day, and it was a really hard thing to do in Jane Austen's day. So she talks about the problems of marriage, and of course, not all marriages had problems. They all had problems, but they weren't all unhappy by any means. Marriage, probably in general, people were pretty happy together, but there were, plenty of exceptions. Well, Pride and Prejudice, you read just a little bit of it. Gosh, I'm sorry I didn't make you read the whole thing because it's so good. But it's a wonderful story. If you ever get a chance to see a movie version of it, or to read preferably read the whole thing. But also there's some pretty good film versions of it. Keira Knightley's, the one 20 years ago, is actually fairly faithful to the book. So, it's worth watching, absolutely. So Pride and Prejudice, let's talk a little bit about it. This particular book, with its wonderful opening line. I love opening lines that we've seen this semester. Marley was dead to begin with. What a great opening line. This one, it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. You can see right there, she's putting on you can just put your own snooty voice as you read it. This is not what she believes, but it's certainly something that's believed by the society around her. And so just, one of those great opening lines. I always love that. You see it on coffee cups sometimes, or on posters. It's really good. She was a great writer. She had tremendous skill as a writer. And then, you need to memorize this for the midterm, of course. Not really. It is a chart of the Bennet sisters, and there's Colonel Fitzwilliam and Mr. Darcy and all the rest, and I can never keep track of everybody. That's why when I read this, I keep like a chart open just so I can figure out who is who. I got down the basic, Elizabeth Bennet and Jane, her sister, and those folks. But I lose track of some of the others up on top, certainly. But Elizabeth Bennet is at the center of this story, and she is the one around whom the story revolves. She's a young woman who is really quite extraordinary, and in many ways, like Jane Austen herself. She has 5 sisters. She's over there. And she has a sister Jane, and these are all different types. We don't really get to know the younger two particularly, but Jane, I think, is a very balanced, good sort of person, a confidant of Elizabeth. Then we have Lydia, who is just a loose wheel, and just does dumb things, and the other sisters kind of feel sorry for her, but she's passionate and doesn't think things through very well at all. And then you have Elizabeth, who's this whole bunch of contradictory qualities all in one. She's very smart to begin with. She's very assertive, and she has a lot of the qualities that Jane Austen did, certainly. Then you have Mr. Darcy, Fitzwilliam Darcy, who at first, when you read the book, you're not going to like him. Nobody likes Darcy at first. He's just not a very lovable man. He's cold, and he is imperious, and he doesn't want to be with people. He doesn't particularly like Elizabeth. He doesn't particularly like anybody. He's very wealthy. But then as the book, and this is the beauty of it, as the book moves on, and Elizabeth feels this way at first too, but then she begins to discover depths to him that she didn't know was there. And that's the great thing is she slowly gets to know him and slowly falls in love with him. So it's nothing fast by any means at all, but it's a great love story in that respect. And he does the same in reverse. He begins to let down his guard and realize that Elizabeth is, even though she's of a lower social class, is somebody just magical for him. And I hate to give away the ending of the story, but it works out pretty nicely for the two of them. And Jane Austen, just to sum it up, really, is not recognized in her lifetime as a great writer. A few people read her, a few people like her. They don't even know who she is. Mostly she's anonymous. But then over 150 years or more, she gets to be known. She gets to be, really in the late 1800s, she starts to be known. And in the 20th century, especially with the rise of feminist scholarship, she really begins to be appreciated as a woman who could just do amazing things in a very difficult time. And aside from that, she's just a fantastic storyteller. And it takes time to discover her. So if you're an author, if you're a musician or whatever, don't worry. Maybe 200 years from now, somebody will appreciate your stuff. If they aren't yet, but maybe they will even sooner than that. But anyway, she's quite a remarkable woman and an excellent writer. And you could easily spend a whole semester on her. There are plenty of college courses that do. But we're just, touching very briefly on her, unfortunately. Well, Emily Dickinson, let's talk about her. She is somebody who is really hard to know, really hard to get any sources on. I mean, if Jane Austen's difficult, Emily Dickinson's practically impossible. She left very little behind in the way of any sort of biographical information. She was a recluse, an agoraphobe. She was afraid of being around people. And anyway, it's just hard to know anything about her. So I always like to talk about an author and then about the situation that the author is in during that time period. That's really hard to do with Emily Dickinson. She's just almost an enigma, but she is a fantastic writer and very different from Jane Austen in that she wrote poetry which is very short and very tight. You read some of it for today, some of her best stuff. She doesn't write a whole lot in her lifetime that has survived, but her writing style is very succinct, I think you could say. Every word matters very much, and we'll look at a couple of her poems in just a bit. This is her house in Amherst, Massachusetts. Amherst is a great place to go to. It's about 2 hours west of Boston. I went and toured her house just a few years ago, and it's great fun. Amherst is a great town. Maybe you have friends who are in college there. There's like 5 different colleges all around the city. But when you're there visiting, go to this house, and you can take a tour, and you can see where she lived and this is her world, honestly. She rarely left the house. She rarely went anywhere beyond Amherst, certainly, but she pretty much lived her life in this house, looking out the window. It actually looks out, or looked out in those days at least, on a graveyard. I kind of think maybe that's significant. I don't know that she looked out on a graveyard because death is so big in her poetry. But anyway, it's a gorgeous house. I wish I owned it. But it's a museum now, and you can take a tour. Her family tree, the Dickinsons here, She's right here. Emily's right here. Born in 1830, died in 1886. Typical sort of New England family. She had a brother over here, Austin, and a sister over there, Vinnie. And Susan was the wife of her brother, so her sister-in-law. And some people have said she had a relationship. She certainly was a great friend of Susan. Some people say it was more than that. I'm not sure. Again, it's really hard to know because there's not a whole lot of evidence out there, but a fairly small family, really, when you look at New England and Victorian English families during that time. So, she actually did go to school, Mount Holyoke Female Seminary, but not for very long. And she didn't like it very much. This is now Mount Holyoke College, which maybe you know somebody who goes there. But this is where she went for just a little while. Again, she didn't like the social interaction. She just was not comfortable. College is hard for anybody. It was really hard for Emily Dickinson. And so she went back and she spent her time just reading like everybody else that we've talked about this semester. Very much self-educated, very widely read, she could talk about Homer and Shakespeare, and she was very influenced by Shakespeare. She said, really, why would anybody read anything else? But she read a whole lot else, and so a very well-educated woman because she taught herself. This is her room. When you go there to the house in Amherst, you're on a guided tour, and you'll look around, and then they'll take you upstairs, and there's a room here, and there's one of those velvet rope things across the door, and it's so funny to everybody who goes there, who knows something about Emily Dickinson, and knows that she spent practically her whole life in this room. They all walk up and they stand at the velvet rope, and they go, just sigh. Everybody sighs there. Because it's a sigh of sympathy, a sigh of appreciation, yes, but a sigh of sorrow that this brilliant woman was self-confined to this room for so much of her life, but she seemed happy there. And it's actually very beautiful wallpaper now that I look at it. That dress over there, if I remember right, is the one and only dress that they are sure that Emily owned. So they put it up there. But she spent all of her time here, even during her father's funeral, which was held at her house. She didn't come out. She just cracked the door open so she could listen. So we're talking, serious agoraphobia here. But during this time, all these years, she is a really, really good writer. I put the Civil War up here. We talk about what's going on at the time. Well, the Civil War was going on in the latter part of her life, but it really, you wouldn't know it so much by reading her stuff. She almost lives in a world separate, a world just on her own. So even though there was so much death and destruction, you look at people we're going to read like Walt Whitman, who this war just tore him apart, but Emily Dickinson is just very much removed from the war, removed from the whole world. So she exists in her own time frame almost. And like pretty much everybody this semester, you can go visit their grave if you don't mind. After you go to her house and see, just wander over to the cemetery and you can see it. And Thoreau on Monday, you can see. Hopefully, I'll find a slide of his grave. It's really good. It's in Concord, Mass. And you go there, and it's the family tomb, family plot, and then there's this little plaque, a little stone plaque in the ground that says Henry, and that's his grave. And so I'll show you a picture of it. Not on Monday, but on Tuesday. But this is Emily Dickinson's grave, her monument. But really, what her monument is her poetry. And you read some of it for today, and I pulled out, I think, 2 or 3 of these just because they are so interesting, I think. And so this one is a favorite. It picks up one of her themes that you see a lot in her poetry, which is death. And I heard a fly buzz when I died. She wrote it in 1862 during the Civil War. I heard a fly buzz when I died. The stillness in the room was like the stillness in the air. Between the heaves of storm, the eyes around had wrung them dry, and breaths were gathering firm for that last onset. When the king be witnessed in the room, I willed my keepsakes, signed away what portions of me be assignable, and then it was there, interposed, a fly, with blue, uncertain, stumbling buzz between the light and me, and then the windows failed, and then I could not see to see. Now, the thing about this is pretty obvious, is you basically have a corpse narrating this. I heard a fly buzz when I died, or somewhere right on that liminal stage between life and death. And what do they experience? It doesn't discount. The king is witnessed in the room. Okay, she was a Christian. Resurrection, glory, heaven, all of that. But this fly, who's bothered me for 40 years, I don't know what this fly is doing there. Except to somehow remind us of the mundane nature, or maybe the decay of flesh that's coming. I don't know. You can read a lot into it, and people have written books about this poem. But it's got that wonderful qualities of Emily Dickinson, and it's very short. It uses words very carefully. Some poets, if you've ever read them, it's like they're getting paid by the word. They just can't stuff enough of them in there. But she is very succinct in her words, in her odd punctuation, her odd capitalization. People are still trying to figure that out as well. But this is one of her most famous, and certainly one of her favorite themes of death. Then she gets a little bit playful too, and this one, when you read it, it's fun, but it's also sad too, because it's about a loner. It's about somebody who is isolated from the world, who doesn't like crowds at all. I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell. They'd advertise, And then she talks about they. How dreary to be somebody. How public like a frog, to tell one's name the livelong June to an admiring bog. So she's saying, it's okay to be a loner. It's okay to spend time with yourself. Do you really want to be like a frog who's out there bloating and making froggy noises and trying to attract attention? And all you have is a bunch of noisy frogs in the bog, in the swamp. And she says, I don't want to be like that. I'm okay being alone. So, although it's about loneliness, it's not a terribly sad poem, and certainly it's got a lot of humor in it as well. And this one is, I think, probably one of her most famous, if not the most famous. It's about what she does in her poetry. Some people tell truth in a way. I'm just reminded when I was in London a couple of years ago, when I did the Pepperdine program there by the Victoria and Albert Museum, one time there was a street preacher there, and he was practically yelling at the people and buttonholing them, grabbing them not physically, but pretty much grabbing them as they walked by, screaming at them about the sin and hell and heaven. And he was having no success at all, because first of all, the British are very reserved sort of people, and that's just not going to work with them. But also because confrontation and directness, even if he's telling the truth, is not a way to persuade people at all. And Emily Dickinson knew that. And so she has this great line about telling the truth, but tell it at a slant. Tell it with just you ease into it. If you have somebody in your life, maybe, somebody back in the dormitory who's really bugging you about something, a direct confrontation is not always, sometimes necessary, not always the best way to do it. Sometimes you sort of ease into it like, I don't know what I mean, like, that outfit just doesn't look quite right on you this morning. Or, I don't know, maybe that's a little more direct. Anyway, that's a bad example. But indirectness in criticism, really, is what she's saying, is that often is the very best thing of all. Tell all the truth, that's a key word, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies, too bright for our infirm delight, the truth's superb, surprised. You can't gaze into the bright and shining light right away. You have to get used to it, like when you step outside. As lightning to the children eased with explanation kind, the truth must dazzle gradually, or every man be blind. What great lines. I mean, she's an artist. She really is. And just this wonderful idea of being a truth teller, but being a truth teller gently is what she's trying to get across there. Anyway, I just wanted to give you those sample poems. Honestly, I tried to shorten everything, so that's it for today. You're free to go and start your weekend.